Brandon Sanderson has written a lot of books in his Cosmere, and I believe there's over 20 of them, well over 20 of them at this point, and it's going to be pretty daunting for anyone who hasn't gotten into his books to know where to start, and that's why I'm making this video, is to help you know where to start, because I've read most of them and probably have a pretty good understanding of where you should go with things and where you should start. And so with that, we're just going to jump right in. The most common suggested first book for Brandon Sanderson, and understandably why by most booktubers, is Mistborn. And I do recommend it if you're looking for a series to get into to start with Mistborn. It's a great world overall and a good standing series, even if you decide that he's not for you and that you don't want to continue on reading all the rest of his books, or feel like you need to take breaks and not want to have a huge time commitment into tons and tons of Brandon Sanderson books to understand the Cosmere. It's a great place to start. Great standalone series. Honestly, you can even just read the first book and it's great on its own. I really enjoyed it and took a while before I got to book 2. In fact, I read other books in between. And so, honestly, Mistborn, that's where to start. That's where you should go if you're really looking for a series to start into. Don't get into Way of Kings yet. You could, but I wouldn't recommend it. There are ways to do it, but I'd start with Mistborn Era 1. Don't start with Era 2. If you aren't looking to get into Brandon Sanderson with a series, the easiest recommendation to get into him is Warbreaker. By far an amazing one-off book, which probably won't be a one-off book for very long, so I'd get to it while you can. But it is an amazing book. It's got a great world, a great magic system, plenty easy to get into and to dive right into as Cosmere, because it doesn't really focus too much on everything else going on. It's very unique to its own planet, which is very, very nice. But it also has some long-term characters and things like magic systems and stuff that are kind of nice to know long-term if you plan on continuing reading. So it's a great base to have. But it's ultimately not necessary to read Warbreaker before you read the rest of the Cosmere. It is just a really nice book to have under your belt if you do plan on reading it all. You could also start with Orelantris if you really wanted to, or Orelantris, depending on how you want to say it. I personally don't overly recommend this book. If you plan on reading all of the Cosmere books, obviously read this one, but it has very little impact on everything going on, and the magic system isn't particularly touched over and over again. So it's really not a huge recommendation for me. It's not one of his best books, at least me personally, I didn't think so. But, I mean, it was an interesting story, and I didn't rate it particularly low on my tier ranking system, so it's not a bad book by any means. So go ahead and pick it up if you plan on reading all of the Cosmere, but I don't necessarily recommend it because it's not his best work by far. Way of Kings is definitely not the place I would start if I were you, unless you are really looking to get into a heavy set series that isn't finished yet. Then go ahead, pick up Way of Kings and even Words of Radiance. But I do not recommend that you push much farther than that before you've read a bunch of his other books, really to understand a lot of the things they start throwing in there, because the Stormlight Archives, Way of Kings, and the following books kind of is the middle point at what pulls together all of the rest of the Cosmere and where the main action is happening. So I definitely suggest that you get to it, but I don't recommend that you get past book 2 before you've read a lot of what else he's gotten into. Now, granted, lots and lots of other people have, and it's not completely necessary. You can read this series all on your own, but I just wouldn't recommend it if you're really looking to understand everything in the Cosmere. Now, I'm a little strange in that I like to know all the details, and I love remembering all the individual characters from the other books that are pulled in from different places. But it's not necessary, and you can enjoy these books plenty even if you haven't read everything. So if you're looking for the heavyset series that isn't finished, by all means pick this up, because book 5 is supposed to come out in the next couple years, I think, and so you'll have half the series to go off of, but not all of it. My last little quick recommendation, if you do end up reading Mistborn or even Warbreaker or Orelantris first and then really enjoy the book and want to read the rest of the Cosmere and get into it, I heavily recommend picking up this book. It's a collection of a bunch of his short stories, and my personal favorite in there is The Emperor's Soul. It is one of his better books overall, in my opinion. It's really, really good. But again, if you plan on getting really into the Cosmere and reading everything, definitely pick this up. It's got tons of short stories that shed a little bit of light, a little bit of extra light on a bunch of the worlds that you read into, like Mistborn and Orelantris, and I believe, not Warbreaker, but Stormlight Archives as well. So it's got a lot of interesting small short stories in here that aren't hard to read. not his best stories by any means, but they are definitely interesting. And if you're really looking to get into this world and the Cosmere as a whole, then definitely pick this up because it's got tons of stories in here. It's pretty thick for how small the book is. It's got tons of stories, and they're worth reading if you really want to get into the small details and very intricate workings of the Cosmere. So that's it for this video. Let me know if you've gotten into Brandon Sanderson already. If you haven't, if you plan on picking up any of these books, what you think you're going to start with, what other people have recommended, just let me know.